Welcome to the Mind Sensei podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and I'll be taking you on a journey to the world of martial arts and introduce listeners to some of the most inspiring and knowledgeable practitioners from around the world. Whether you're a seasoned martial artist or a curious beginner, or just enjoy hearing a great story, the Mind Sensei podcast Down Under has something for everyone. So tune in, sit back, and let us take you on a journey through the world in martial arts. So welcome back to the Mind Sensei podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and on this special episode, I'm joined by Mr. Buddy Morrison, international respected expert in firearms, close quarter combat, and martial arts. He's the founder of Morrison Tactical, Master Instructor in the Center Axis Relock system, and holds black belts in 5 disciplines, including a 7th degree title of Senior Professor in American Kenpo fighting systems. With over 35 years' experience and 2 inductions in the World Martial Arts Hall of Fame, he brings a lifetime of knowledge and real-world application to our conversation. Welcome, Mr. Buddy Morrison, to the Mind Sensei podcast. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Peter. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's kick this party off. Let's take it back to the beginning and let's talk about what inspired you to start practicing and what was your first style and how did you find your way there?
That's kind of an interesting story. I actually did that, got started off of a dare from a friend that dared me to go take a class, and I ended up going to a Kung Fu school years and years ago and found out that was quite not for me. And I ended up seeing a friend, and I said, well, who's the toughest guy in town? Who's the toughest guy to train from? And I said, that would be Luther Collins, L.C. Collins. I ended up going to his studio, and we had a Taekwondo and Okinawan Kenpo system that he taught, and I was with him for about 19 years.
What style was that?
That was Taekwondo. It was a hybrid of Taekwondo and Okinawan Kenpo.
So what impressed you about him when you started there? What was his lineage and where did he start?
He had a 5th in Taekwondo from WTF, World Taekwondo Federation, and he had a 9th from old style Kenpo system, old pine tree style, from a gentleman, Professor A.C. Church, out of South Carolina, I believe. It's been a long time ago. He was really good. He was a great fighter. He was a semi-professional fighter around this area. He probably had 160 fights undefeated. He quit training and fighting one day and just started to open up his own dojo, and kind of there, he was kind of icon in this area for a long time.
How long did you stay there? What was your journey there with him?
I was there for about 19 years with him.
So how old were you when you started there?
I was 19.
Okay. Started fairly young in your life with it. How long did you stay there for, and what rank did you get to there?
I got through 3rd degree with him. Yeah, I was a 3rd degree with him.
What did he call his style?
He just really didn't have a set name for it. He just said it was Taekwondo and Kenpo. That's all he would say. He didn't really say he had about the system he would hand out. He would say, this is part of our lineage coming from Taekwondo as far as the kicking and foot movements and stuff of that nature. But the hand gestures and the fighting, the up-close fighting, was Okinawan Kenpo.
So with your journey there, where did that progress to? How did you decide that you wanted to go do something else?
It was a good part of my life. Teaching there about 4 to 5 nights a week, training and tournaments and different things. And I felt like I kind of pinnacle with him. At that point, I was working out with him, and the only thing that was left for him to show me was some extra forms and stuff. I was kind of a gap, a road, and I'd seen some different things that I was very interested in. And as far as the Parker system and some other styles that I wanted to venture out and explore into. When I got inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame in 2000, I believe, I saw a demonstration of a pressure point knockout there at the ceremony. That sparked my interest. And so I started following down that path. And that led me to training with George Dillman for just a little bit. And then I kind of over to Parker system. I started training with a gentleman out of Georgia by the name of Brent Berry. And I spent a little bit of time with Brent, and that was more long distance video training with him. Then my path kind of ventured over to the Dragon Society. I got hooked up with some guys, Rick Moneymaker, Tom Muncie from the Dragon Society International.
I noticed you got some videos on the Dragon Society. I was on Tactical Shooting. They're selling some your DVDs there, Basic Fundamentals of Combat Shooting. You can buy for $29.99.
Yeah, that's a great video. It's kind of an introductory video we usually do with people that are sort of new to shooting, kind of thinking out of the box a little bit. I forgot that. That was quite some time ago. My stuff we teach now, of course, I still teach handgun permission for the state of Tennessee, doing that for quite some time. And I also do pistol classes as far as advanced pistol. I teach like a self-defense pistol class, tactical pistol class, and then all the way up through our premier system, which is Center Axis. Of course, we also do carbine rifle shooting and shotgun shooting as well.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your specialty is shooting. I'm fascinated by guns. We don't have jack guns over here. They've sort of taken them mostly away from us. You started shooting at the age of 6. So can you share some memory, your early experience, father, grandfather to shooting?
Yes. As a matter of fact, both my grandfather got me into shooting kind of early. Probably the earliest that I made mention at around the age of 6. My grandfather, who I basically adored and stayed with a lot, he would get me into, pull me outside and get me to do some target shooting with him. There was probably, I would say, about 6 or 7 instances where he would just take me out, and I was probably about that age, shooting and trigger. Wasn't old enough to hold a gun, but I remember shooting a 12-gauge shotgun at that age, which was pretty cool.
At least he wasn't ripping out the 50 cals at 6 years old. So
No, no, nothing like that.
I know you trained with Ranger Hall of Famer Mr. Gary O'Neill. He's on the list. I promised him I'd read his book first, which I'm trying to squeeze in. Tell us about your experience about learning close quarter combat from him. How did that mentorship take place?
He is an awesome person. He is a excellent instructor. Matter of fact, he and I kind of did off right off the bat, almost like we knew each other all of our lives when we first met, and trained a lot, 2 and 3 times a year, being together at my place, sometimes at his place. It just kind of into place. He just started mentoring me almost like, hey, you need to do this. Hey, try this. He said, this worked for me in Vietnam. This worked for me in combat. See what you think of it. So it was kind of.
You did training with Gary O'Neill, right? How did that all start? Like, did you meet?
We met at a seminar in Pennsylvania years ago. He was just doing a discussion, a talk on combat stress and how it affects the body. I'd never met him before, never heard of him. Went up to meet him afterwards, and we just kind of hit it off, so to speak, and spent a lot of time on the phone discussing things, and then getting together and starting training from the mind concepts of stress through pistol shooting, through rifle shooting, the whole 9 yards. He even shared training he did with the government with me. He taught classes there, the material he taught.
Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Paul Castle and your journey. That you're a master instructor at the Center Axis Relock system, or I should say, might add. And let's talk a little bit about what that is. A lot of people probably would know it as like from the John Wick movies. And I think there's some rumors floating around that we can probably list those myths that Keanu was one of the ones that developed this style of shooting. So let's address that while we're here.
Okay. Center Axis is a close quarter battle system that was developed by Paul Castle. Paul was a Brit. He came across, after his service, he made his way to Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where I met him through Gary O'Neill. His system is probably the best up-close shooting system I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of them. Keanu Reeves, trained by a gentleman named Taryn Butler. Taryn does a lot of stuff for the movies. He runs a company called Center Tactical. He didn't really develop the system. Taryn taught him, and Taryn saw the system. I believe he saw something from Paul on it and spoke to Paul on the phone. I don't think he ever officially trained with Paul, but he got a lot of information from Paul about the system in order to, I guess, orient that towards the John Wick series.
But the system itself came from Paul Castle.
That is correct.
So tell us a little bit for us non-shooting people, a few countries around that aren't into that side of things. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen the movie and they all have an interest towards it. What is Center Axis Relock? If I'm a total newbie, how would you explain it to me?
So Center Axis Relock is primarily discussing your spine, your sensor, and how it rotates. So most people in shooting systems, we have a preferred hand and a preferred eye. And so with Center Axis, I'm able to shoot not only with my preferred hand, which for me is my right, but I can shoot left-handed as well. And so this gun rotates or axis around my center, whether it be right-handed or left-handed, and I move around the gun. The gun doesn't move around me, I move around the gun. As far as the relock part of the discussion on the name moniker, Paul came up with that. You're orienting and locking your anatomy to stabilize the firearm, and where it's up close. Most people shoot at a distance that about where you read a book from. Okay, we're as humans, we're not kind of used to an explosion going off next to us. We want to push it away. So with this firearm being up close to you, it's a little bit unnerving the first time you do it, but you're able to lock the enemy in. And it's just like, anything you do, the closer you are to your body with something that you're trying to control, the stronger you are with it. So the system in itself uses your anatomy, uses physics to help control the weapon and make it completely stable as far as more than what normally shooting method would be. It's quick changes, it's angles. I can basically move with the gun quickly more than I could in a traditional type shooting system, where it would be Weaver or isosceles.
Okay, so the non-firearms people, what's a Weaver? What's an isosceles?
Most of the stuff you see on TV and movies where the gun's extended out in front of you, in the isosceles, you're basically making a triangle with your arms and your legs pointed towards a target. That's where your arms are extended straight out. It was a system invented by a man named Jack Weaver, and Jack pretty much shot isosceles, although he had a bum left shoulder, according to Paul, and would drop his elbow, kind of reinforcing, and you're putting a leg forward rather than just being sort of horizontal to the target with your feet. And you have a leg drop back, and you kind of get a little bit more stabilization with some mass behind the firearm, more so than just a standard isosceles.
Where did that take you? So you learnt off Paul Castle, became a master instructor. What was involved to become a master instructor? So obviously you started with him to do an introductory course, or how much is involved to become a master instructor?
Paul taught, basically did an intro class, and that was usually involved over a weekend. And it kind of gets your feet wet as to the system, what it is, what it entails. He also ended out of the manual. So the first time I met Paul, I went to his class. He'd come in and he handed us like a 200-page manual. He said, know that by the end of the morning. So I spent my evening going through that whole manual and trying to absorb as much material as I could. And of course, I didn't quite make it through about half of it, but I was able to go through the system, at least have a sort of a background knowledge, because it's completely different than most people done shooting up until that point. Paul, he would start the class off and go through the system and the basic understandings of how the system works versus what's known as traditional shooting here. And then upgrade the basic point where you understand what Center Axis does, how Center Axis evolves into its parameters. And it's typically an up-close system. It's designed for confined spaces. And that's the way Paul turned it. Although I found a lot more uses for it than just what Paul had.
I know you studied off him, but you became pretty good friends and you had a pretty close relationship.
He was a character.
So I think Paul's unfortunately passed away. So you've continued on to teach. Tell us about that journey there.
Yes, he had cancer 4 times, and I believe the last time just got him more so than what he thought, and he was an interesting individual. He started off as a police officer and involved into an instructor, and then, he was almost like an entertainer at the end of it. I mean, he was a cool cat to hang around. He had taken it to a point that he felt his involvement would push the system forward. He wanted to evolve the system. And basically, that's kind of where I came in at. He told me, he said, "You take this and run with it. See what you can do with it. Put your spin on it. And that way you can get something and you can own it. And when you own something and you create something from something you've been taught, then it's a whole different animal."
Let's talk a little bit about Gary O'Neill. How did you guys meet? How did you meet, and where did your relationship evolve to from there? I know you're good friends now. Is it a mentorship kind of relationship there, or is he your instructor?
Gary is he's a family friend. Let's put it that way. Gary's family with me. We hit it off years ago at an event in Pennsylvania. And it's just like, Peter, if you meet somebody for the first time, it's like you've known them all your life. Like, where have you been? And that was kind of the way he and I were. We immediately connected. We started talking almost every day after that, via the phone or whatever, and just kind of build a relationship from there. And he basically assumed a mentorship role with me almost right off the bat. And then we just started training together. That's taken us, we're still doing that up to this day.
So how did your relationship evolve? How did you get into American Kenpo?
So American Kenpo, I started, like I said, with L.C. Collins. And once I reached a pivotal point with him and I wanted to expand and do some other training, I sought out a guy named Brent Berry. He was the closest. There's no American Kenpo in this area back then. And I sought out this man named Brent Berry, who had some training tapes, and he was fairly close. He was in Georgia, which is about 4 or 5 hours from me. And we kind of connected and did off right off the bat. And he was helping me understand the differences in the Parker system versus the Okinawan system that I'd been training in, and kind of the differences of the moves and stuff there. And then I did some training with him up until a point. I met Sean Kelly, did a little bit of his seminars in Florida. And then I met Marcus. And once I met Marcus, it was like, this is what I want to be doing. And we kind of hit off right off the bat, just kind of like I did. It just kind of went there.
When you started with Marcus, did you go back to the beginning and go all the way through what you know and helped you at all? And like, where did you start with there? Because I know you're a 7th degree title of senior professor in American Kenpo for a 7th. A pretty mean feat. Tell us about that journey from where you started with Marcus to where you are now.
It was, started back at the very beginning. He was patient enough to answer a lot of questions that I had, kind of me through change and the way he does things versus the way I've done them before. And started really from my feet, how to reorganize my neutral bow. That was huge. And so I'm still working on that. So say I'm probably neutral bow was huge difference for me to dance with. And I still fight that today, and he'll catch it with me, and I have to.
It's similar to shooting though, right?
Yeah, it is. And so what we found out in the process of training with Marcus, the consistency of being closer in and shooting and fighting was similarities between the knife. And eventually, I don't know what point we came to this idea, but basically we could design a system that teaches one platform, meaning one shooting platform, one fighting platform, one knife platform to fight from, one combative model where you could exchange all these weapons with. And that's kind of where we are today. We've kind of, I shoot and simulated within the Kenpo footwork system to come up with this combative model.
Pretty much your experiences with your firearms influenced your approach to martial arts through that.
Right.
The whole black belts in 5 distinct systems I have here in my notes. How have those arts influenced your creation of your system involving nerve manipulations and skeletal destruction?
Most of that was from Dragon Society. They helped me dive pretty deeply the nerve systems, the Chinese, the TCM theory, understanding how nerve manipulations and techniques work together as far as locks, holds, what the difference is, and how you can use those to. There's a difference between understanding technique from a white belt mentality to a black belt mentality. And Marcus and I, when we first started diving into the material, and we went back and took yellow belt, for example, and went back and put the meridian theory inside the techniques as they were done, as they were designed in the Parker system. And what we find out is when you start looking at the acupuncture manuals and the techniques and stuff like that, the way that the Chinese medicine laid it out, it ended up as like dangerous. Do not do this technique on anybody.
Yeah,
So
they're a blueprint to knock people out, Kenpo system. When you start studying pressure points, I did a bit of Kyushu and self, and that helped understand quite a bit. That I started going back and looking at all our techniques because, as we know pressure points, we do pressure points. My response to that is bullshit. We don't understand them. We hit them. We're lucky. We activate a lot of them. We hit them, but we don't know in the Kenpo world what we're doing with them because we don't pertain to the study of actual pressure point application and activations and all the rest of it. The Kenpo system was, Mr. Parker was, I reckon, pretty much a genius because if you look at the way the whole system's set out, you're just hitting points left, right, and center.
exactly. And that I never got a chance to meet Ed Parker, but that would have been a discussion I would have had with him. I would love to have picked his brain with that. People that they know this stuff, and a lot of it, and most of it came from the Chinese things, and understanding that type of theory. If you don't know that world, people are very closed with that information until they figure out, okay, may have something to offer, and then they're willing to share that information. And so there's a lot of guys out there that hold that stuff very close to their chest. You kind of have to bridge a gap or make a friendship or something there that open up that discussion, and you can share information that way. If you're training in firearms, there's always a lethal aspect of somebody who wants to be more than what they're capable of doing, and they've got a firearm in their hand. So it's very exhausting. And I'm talking about this a lot. By the time we're done with the class, we're physically and mentally exhausted from watching everybody's hands, where the muzzle's at, just trying to make sure everybody leaves with the same number of holes they showed up with.
Yes, correct. I'll tell you a funny story here. I think I was told this one before. I went to Vegas with my brother-in-law, so if you realize it, took him down. We went to the Vegas gun store, right? And went, okay, let's go shoot some guns. It's cool. Anyway, he's not really a manly man, brother-in-law. And picks the Desert Eagle. So it's got slides, so the recoil's lower, and I'm sure they only have half charged ammo anyway. And I just picked a Dirty Harry Magnum. I'm like, no, I want the full experience. Picked the saw. I think I picked the 10 and the saw and the Desert Eagle. He picked it. I picked the 45 Magnum anyway. So he's up first, and he's got the Desert Eagle out. And like you said, the range is there. You don't touch the gun. This is what the difference between going to Vegas and going to a range with someone. When you go to a range with someone, they teach you gun safety. They teach you what to do. They teach you jams. They teach you something. When you go to Vegas, you pick the guns. They take them out the back. The ranger brings them in. The ranger loads them for you. He stands there. He hands you the gun. He has his hand on his shoulder and his other hand on you and on his gun in case you decide you want to do something different. So I understand how exhausted you'll get. Because if there's anywhere where you're going to have a few different individuals, it's got to be Vegas. And he gets up, and so they brought the guns out, got a Desert Eagle, loaded it up. Brother-in-law steps up, puts it in, lines it up, pulls the trigger, and the fucking gun goes flying out of his hand. Anyway, the gun's going like this. Anyway, it was like this slow-mo movie. Everyone's like diving out of the way. The fucking ranger's diving for cover. We're all diving for cover anyway. He gets up and he's like, he was going troppo. He's like, that's it. No more manly gun for you. You're going to get the little girly 9mm. And so he never lives that down since then. I'm like, yeah, you're getting the girly gun. Meanwhile, I get to shoot the saw and everything else. That was pretty
Yeah. It was another funny story like that. this guy, you'll have to get Marcus to tell you the story, but let's just say he was probably one of those, what'd you call them, umpties, dumpties?
Numpties.
So he was a numpty, let's put it that way, in one of our classes. And, you know, some of these people, when you get people in for an advanced class, you don't know really what their skill set is until they actually get out there and we start saying, okay. So, you know, they say they can shoot, but when we get out there and look like, oh, no, they cannot shoot. And they cannot be safe around a gun, which is more important. Marcus, I never what, how many, he is on him like white on rice the whole day. I mean, just yelling in this guy's ear, you know. This guy had no, and I mean, Marcus was exhausted. And this guy he had like gloves on, you know, he had the full tactical gear on. I'm like, this guy showed up for a pistol class with like, almost like he had like gloves, a holster, he had all this stuff on, and he couldn't get the inept.
Was his name Batman? Um,
Yeah, I think he thought he was. It was quite comical. And Marcus, he said, I hope he does not come back to us. It was a 2-day class, right? And I told him, I said, the best part is you get to see him again tomorrow. Oh,
yeah, you get that instance where people do some weird. We had a class here. I'll tell you, this was hilarious. We had a guy come and join. He wanted to do. He was one of these. I want to do everything. Do the privates. Do every lesson you got. I said, well, I've got 3 rules. You know, don't be late. Show up with your uniform and your gear, and pay your fees and be respectful. They're my rules. You know, pretty simple, not hard. Well, on the first day, he broke 3 of the 4. So, like, anyway, he gets here and he's like, okay, I got his uniform for him. He goes, oh, well, where do I change? Or we're just in the garage. There's nowhere to change. I said, well, you know, luckily I had the door down. It wasn't open to the neighborhood. I said, well, we're all guys here, mate. Just, you know, rip your strides off and put your uniform on. Away we go. Well, he didn't tell us he was freeborn. This guy gets changed. He's totally naked. What's going on? Oh my gosh. It was interesting. Anyway, needless to say, he didn't last that long.
I had a guy one time, he came to me and he kind of like you, he wanted to accelerate beyond his capabilities right off the bat. And it was like his first or second class. And I said, I don't think you're quite ready to do that yet. I said, let's kind of continue on the basics, you know. And here's one of the things that I kind of push is, especially with the firearms classes that I do, period. You know, the SEALs have kind of a term, it's called virtuosity. And basically it means doing the common uncommonly well. I drill on basics a lot. All advanced material is just really good basics in motion when you get down to it. And that's kind of what this system is. I mean, basically, you know, understanding basics, you can understand anything. And you were able to put the advanced material ahead of itself at that point. He couldn't put his right foot in front of his left. I mean, some people really try, but they're just untrainable. And so I had this guy, and I mean, he was awful. One of my better students was working with him. He ended up hurting him, you know, in just some goofy accident that he was just trying to do a technique from. So I said, well, I can't do that anymore. So I had to pull him off, have him work with me, wanting to learn more and more and more advanced stuff. I'm like, you're not ready for that. So I just started turning the wick up on him. And okay, well, if you want to learn that, here we go. So he lasted about 1 class after that. He was done. People like that are just, they're not good to be around, man. I mean, they're dangerous as far as movement. They're dangerous as far as trying to gain knowledge. And I'm like, why do you want to learn this so quickly, so fast? And he couldn't give a good answer. So always get crazy people like that, especially you get somebody who wants to do firearms classes really quickly. That's a red flag for me, buddy. Like, okay, why do you need to know that?
It's a little bit like the pilots wanting to learn how to fly, like not worried about landing.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had, I've had a couple of calls from the FBI about people like, is this person in your class? You know, they like to keep close tabs on certain types of people. You know, I'll let you know. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of scary when you get a call like that. It's kind of interesting because, like, I didn't know I was on the FBI's radar list. You know, I wasn't doing anything wrong, but here I am trying to give an explanation of why this guy's taking my class. I'm like, I don't know. You'll have to ask him. That type of training is pretty well monitored.
So to do a class with you, do they have to register anyway?
Yeah, they have. Well, when you say register, I mean, when I train somebody, if it's a basic firearms class, I'm pretty much open to anybody at that point. But to get into the advanced material, you have to be vetted either through me or someone that I trust to vet me in order to move into that type of material. I just don't take anybody because of the responsibility that I'm passing on that material to someone that I don't know. I'm not just going to do that. That's why I've never done videos or put stuff out there because of that.
You did study with Elsie Collins, Kenpo and Taekwondo, and then you hooked up with Brent Barry. That was American Kenpo. Do you know what system that was? That was Parker's or Tracy's?
It was Parker's system. Yeah,
System.
that was a very brief time.
From there to Dragon Society, was it?
Yes.
Okay, so with the Dragon Society, what system is that?
The Dragon Society is another version of Okinawan Kenpo. It has a system within itself called Torte Jitsu. Okay, and it's basically the nerve manipulation is as a system, from manipulations to Kyusho to punching to the whole 9 yards. A system within itself into the Dragon Society. I went to a few of Dillman's seminars. To say I was a direct student of Dillman, I really wasn't. I was mainly trying to get my foot wet within that type of material. I went to a couple of seminars. Matter of fact, I got knocked out the first seminar I went to with him. He demonstrated on me and knocked me flat out. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, I got to know how to do that.
Right, okay. You know there's 2 lines when you go to those seminars, right? The wrong line, brother. There's one line knocked out and the other line to knock people out. You get in the other line. There's some tips for you.
Yeah, evidently I was standing in the wrong line on that one.
Yeah, that story was told. Like I did Kyusho with Mr. Steve Stewart out of Canada, and he was telling me that story. He said the first one I went to, they said there's 2 lines, one to be knocked out and one to knock people out. Don't go in the knockout line, go in the other one. He said it was a good choice. I'm like, yeah, okay.
I think I was sitting in the floor taking notes. He was describing this technique, and all of a sudden it's just like he found me. He's like, "Well, where have you been all day?" And I was like, "Are you talking to me?" And so he said, "Come up here." And I got up there, and he demonstrated it really good on me. I mean, he knocked me flat out. That was interesting.
Before I started studying Kyusho, you mess with Kenpo techniques and stuff. And I had one of my guys, and he was, I think it was the advent of BJJ back then, and he's like, how do you handle the BJJ guys? And, I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, it's a pretty broad question. What specifics are we talking about? He says, they come in for the takedown. I said, well, we do have some RAM techniques, but you really got to be careful with them. But I guess you could go to a RAM technique. That's sort of what he had in his, in terms of his, quivers and his bow. And so he said, "What do you mean? It's all, come at me for a takedown." And I think I did one of the, but I think it's just pretty much a block, and I come over the top, and I just tapped him in the spine. It was more not a hand sword, but a loose hand, and his legs went out from under him, and he was just delirious for like 20 seconds. And I'm like, "Chip, that looked pretty good." We talked about before, if you don't study your pressure points, sometimes you get lucky, and that was just a sheer Kenpo skills, right point, right time, right application, set up the sequence, and it worked well. And then after that, I'm like, okay, I've got to go find out some more about this stuff. And then once I started studying Kyusho, I'm like, okay, well, it was just a very nice setup, and he's like, well, what'd you hit me with? Felt like I got hit by a truck, and, to sit him down, I was patting his back just like you do with restore people's energy. But I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing it, just out of instinct, I suppose. But it's funny how this stuff, it's funny how it comes about.
It makes a believer out of them pretty quick, especially after that. I remember going to a seminar the Professor Muncie was putting on, and I ended up signing up for a private lesson after the seminar. He said, "Yeah." He said, "We'll go for about an hour and a half." I said, "Okay, great." So I got out all this, notebook, and I'm ready to go, a recorder. And I said, "You mind if I, take notes?" He said, "Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead. Take pictures, whatever you want." And I said, "So what are we studying?" He said, "I'm going to show you what the side of your thumb is for." And I kind of said, "Side of my thumb." That was probably the best lesson in nerve manipulation that I ever had. It was just groundbreaking for me as far as the grip. And, that's the first thing you come in contact with when an arm or something comes at you, is understanding where that's at. And that fits into everything that I do, including the pistol, believe it or not.
But don't leave us hanging. What do you need to do with the side of your thumb?
Knew I knew you were gonna ask me that.
Come on.
So it's understanding how the bone manipulates nerves. It's not just the pads of your fingers. The pads of your fingers, there's no backup mass. There's no mass behind that. You need to put bone to nerve, pinching that bone. It's best if I demonstrate it rather than,
Okay. Well, that means a visit now. Now you crossed me.
That's exactly right.
I'll put it on my list. I've got a big list. Let's talk a little bit about American Kenpo fighting systems and training with Mr. Marcus Bonfiglio. Let's talk about your journey there. Some of your memorable moments with Marcus.
So Marcus and I started out literally from the ground up. He fixed my neutral bow, as he calls it, and understanding how the footwork actually works within the system. We had some point in our training where we started crossing over, and I can't remember if it was the hands or the footwork or something. I said, this is very similar to what I'm doing with Center Axis. And so, and he was taking Center Axis classes from me at that time. We just started comparing notes like, well, this is similar to that. That's similar to this. We started melding or meshing the system together. Both systems really are designed for multiple attackers. So AKFS and Center Axis are based primarily to deal with multiple attackers, whether it's with the blade, the empty hand, or the pistol. And I think that, the footwork in the Kenpo system drives everything. To me, it's and the way Marcus teaches it is the primary engine to understanding movement in a combative sense, and understanding how to drive from target to target to target. And just applying that science to it is huge. And it really was a breakthrough thing with both of us. And we still are surprised today to see how much stuff totally lines up. I don't think Paul Castle ever trained with anyone in the Kenpo system. He was not a martial artist, and he would tell you that. Paul was a teams guy. He was based with his 2 to 4 man teams. SWAT teams was basically who he trained with. All of those things are kind of helped us line up. One feeds the other. And whether I've got a pistol or a blade or my empty hands, I'm still fighting from that one platform. Whatever I teach and I pass along to students, I believe it should be combat proven. And stuff I picked up from Gary, from Paul, from Marcus, it's been combat proven.
That's the big thing with Kenpo as well, because you can be caught in the bubble where, as it written, so it shall pass. Well, that just ain't true.
No, and here's the thing about that. 144 techniques, 154 techniques, whatever. There's a thing called Hicks Law. So that's in direct defiance of the Hicks Law. if something happens and you have to run through your mind about what technique out of 154 you're going to do, come on, man. That's not going to happen. You're going to be hit 4 times as you're sitting there thinking. And that's kind of where Marcus and I are at with this. And he told me, he said, I'd rather know 5 techniques inside out, frontwards, backwards, and be able to apply them in a combative way than sitting there trying to figure out what 154 techniques that I could do on this person. And that's the same way with Center Axis. That's why it's based off of multiple attackers, because in a combative arena, that unfolds. The attack unfolds itself. So you truly have to formulate as you're moving.
My instructor was today when I was doing his interview, just saying our problem with Kenpo is you got so much to learn. It takes an average of 10 years to get to the end. And you need to get to the end to have the material to learn how to piece it together, to summarize it and to categorize it into some sort of relationship. Because we learn certain techniques and then you don't get to see that attack for another belt or so later. Relationships and family groupings of those. You got to get to the end to know everything, to then go, okay, here's your group of stuff. Now, what are your relationships with it?
Exactly. Finding out how those things correlate with each other and how the attacks correlate, that's a different level of understanding once you have completed all the material. But,
I did an experiment, so I like to do experiments, but people don't know they're being experimented on. And I created we call it a middle program, but there's nothing middle about it. So we had the kids program, and then we had the EPAC program, and then we had parents who wanted to train. So the kids were trained, they were interested, they wanted to train. But the problem was at the beginning when the kids would train and the adults would do EPAC, there's so much to learn in EPAC, the kids just leave them in the dust. So the kids learning, more advanced techniques than their parents, well ahead of their parents. And the idea was, how do I get them to travel as a unit? So I created this, what I call the Kenpo Tactical system. And it's a reduced syllabus, same techniques as the juniors, and then they learn a bit more. And I've introduced sticks, purple, introduce things a little bit earlier, a weapon here or there. And what I found was the guys that were doing the tactical system compared to the guys that are doing the EPAC, they were flying. They were absolutely flying along. And because they didn't have so much, they were picking it up pretty quick. And then, so I did the experiment where I took them to camp. Said, okay, you guys, you're doing a tactical system. You're not learning everything these guys are learning, but the way I structured it, they're sort of learning the important stuff that gives them the basics of what the other guys are learning. And it was to see how they would work together with people of equivalent rank or slightly higher rank or lower rank, when you put them together at camp, how they're going to cope. And they were actually better at coping than the people of the equivalent rank. So I'm like, okay, well, this is working. Like, nothing better than real data, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can see people assimilate stuff quickly. And I'm like, well, I didn't expect that,
Yeah, correct. So it was interesting. It was an interesting experiment. So I had people that, and then some of the people then wanted to shift across because they could see, all these extra things that they were doing that were getting there. And then, but it was good. It was good. It was good to see. It sort of proves the point as well. But they still have, I think, they all get there in the end is the deal. So even the tactical guys, the way I set it up is in the end, they all get there. They all have the same amount of information. They just got to take a longer road to get there. But they tend to get there a bit faster because you're cutting back some of the numbers.
When people train in anything, whether it's martial arts or firearms or whatever, they develop, for lack of a better term, training scars along the way, whether it's bad information, bad habits, or they, in their mind, kind of cross-correlate information that doesn't really go together. And sometimes training that out of them is harder than training new material. sometimes dealing with somebody who has absolutely no experience is much easier because they have no training scars. You fill the information in the way you need it to be assimilated, and then they seem to be able to reproduce it right away. But if you get into, someone who's had a lot of experience, and those training scars usually pop up immediately.
Let's talk about real world applications.
Yes, sir.
Your time as a sheriff's deputy obviously tested effectiveness of some of the techniques you teach today. Tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Most of the training I did as a deputy, real world experience, we had to use something that was more of a use of force scenario. And I don't know if you're familiar with a use of force chart that law enforcement has to deal with. It's basically, you can't just, go right to the gun. It has to be verbal escalation to physical to pepper spray to non-lethal, and then it goes into lethal. So there's kind of a chain there that legally you have to go through. So that kind of hinders what you can train and what's effective. And so there's a difference between what's effective and what's legally taught to law enforcement. And sometimes, in my opinion, they are handicapped in this country because of legal entanglements of stuff like that, rather than learning something that would be effective right off the bat. And if it's in terms of what the department sees as an excessive use of force, they won't teach it. So it has to be safe legally, and legally safe to be taught. So the firearm techniques were pretty much what I expected. It was more traditional type shooting. They didn't do a whole lot of CQB because I wasn't in a SWAT arena at that point. I was just a reserve patrol officer, but it was more of a traditional type shooting scenario. Weaver and isosceles was basically taught. The training was good. We trained at night. We trained, with lights, sirens going on, the whole 9 yards. So you got to experience, those things. And I remember, thinking like, well, am I actually going to be able to use that? And I remember the first call I went on was to serve a warrant on a felon. As I go to knock on the door, I look down, and the guy I was riding with, he said, "Remember, this guy's a felon." And when I knocked on his door, I happened to look down and I saw a shotgun laying right beside the door. So that was kind of a gut check for me to make sure that, at that point, it got extremely real for me. And my training, I took it very serious at that point from there on out until I left the sheriff's office.
So with the sheriff's office over where you guys are, the sheriff's voted in, right?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you become a deputy?
To be a deputy, you have to sit through a minimum of, I believe it depends on the department. So the one I was with was 80 hours, both legal training, self-defense, firearms training. In order to be certified, you have to, whatever you're carrying, you have to be certified to carry it. So you have to pass the number test. You have to be sprayed with pepper spray and learn how to interact with people legally, those type of things.
Have you encountered any situations where your training has made a direct difference, say in de-escalation or self-defense in your line of duty?
Yes. There are several situations that I come across where, de-escalation was the easiest thing to do, and probably the best thing to do in several circumstances. In those situations, I think that not going directly to lethal means probably solved a lot of situations, and it probably could have went from kind of a bad situation to a very dire or worse situation. So, being able to talk my way out of a situation or de-escalate someone who was, for lack of a better term, violent outburst, or, something where he was causing an issue, really paid off.
So in terms of your teaching and philosophy, what's say your core philosophy like when it comes to training civilians versus military and law enforcement?
So I believe a kind of a layered approach with that. And, with civilians, it's when I look at type of student that I'm looking at, and what do they need to know? Why do they need to know that? And so I'm a little bit more guarded with some information with a civilian than I am with law enforcement or military guys where they need to know life's on the line and other lives are on the line. I'm a little bit more open and free with that type of information. Especially with military guys. I've trained with some military groups and, you know, they've sent guys over to learn the Center Axis system. And I'm very open and very detailed with the information that I give out to them. It's worked out well. I've had one gentleman call me on a sat phone from theater thanking me that the system worked and the information that I shared with him. So that kind of helps me understand I'm doing the right thing in the arena that I'm doing it in.
If it didn't work, you wouldn't be getting any calls, huh?
Well, probably not now.
Yeah, so in the old adage I've known using is good news is not really good news.
Sure.
So, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about combative arts and tactical shooting?
They've the movies sometimes don't do shooting justice. Sometimes it's a lot of what I call movie foo. It's special effects and those type things, and it's people. I think they correlate that with shooting, and it's not quite the same thing. People have a good understanding, typically over here, of what shooting is, and they're around it a lot, especially in the area that I live in. And I was raised up from a young age shooting, but to truly understand what a concept is of moving with a weapon and shooting with a weapon on the move is completely foreign to most people here. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, I guess, in training and hopefully I can push that across and tactical shooting and that type thing. Anybody can say anything's tactical as far as, you could pick up a stick, paint it black and call it a tactical one. That seems to be everywhere now. People have a misconception from movies about what tactical is, what tactical movement is, what tactical shooting is, until they've actually sat through a class, an actual, organized class. They seem to understand that, okay, that's not quite what I had an idea of. And as far as the combative arts, people see things on TV or UFC matches and stuff of that nature, and they think that it's really easily produced and they don't understand the nuances that are going on. There's a lot of fine points to get someone into a situation that they can easily get out of. And I think people see too many movies and feel like they can just reproduce that, and it doesn't quite work out that way.
Like, I looked at this when I named the program that people were training in, the Kenpo tactical program. We say tactical is, the definition I look at the definition out of the dictionary, right? And say, methods or actions designed to achieve a specific goal. Well, in the movies, it's to get box office seats. And how many bad guys can you knock off to make the movie look fantastic? So, yeah, it's a different ball game altogether, really. Ours is, you go home safe. Make sure the stuff works. So, but with these specific steps in mind to achieve the goal of each of these steps. Yeah, there's no way John Wick would have survived his last one. He shot way too many times, even with his bulletproof, jackets and stuff. I'm like, come on, dude, come on. Thrown down the stairs, arms broken on stairs. Did you give our stuntman a raise?
Yes, that's true. Yeah. The first John Wick was my favorite, and probably I wouldn't say it was totally realistic in application, but it was more so than the rest of them, I guess.
Better than Last Action Hero, right?
Well,
Want to be a farmer? Here's 2 acres. Let's talk a little bit about some of your martial arts training. Tell us about your black belt grading. So what black belt grading was probably a memorable one, and what was your hardest grading and why?
probably the most memorable one, and probably the one of the hardest was the first black belt I got, which was in with L.C. Collins. Now, that was, you know, like a marathon test almost. It was 4 to 5 hours plus. And, you know, you had to go through all the techniques of the school, all the forms, self-defense, weapons, form weapons, katas, and then you had to fight every person in the school for 3-minute rounds. So, and it was nonstop, right? And there's probably 35, 40 people in the school. And so, you know, I was completely wiped out. And then at the end of it, I had to fight him. That was a memorable one, probably one of the hardest that I ever did. It was a pretty grueling experience, you know, just to get through it.
Let's talk about what's one of the hardest things you've had to do in your journey.
You know, sometimes probably one of the hardest things I think is, and it's just not just for me, but I think for anybody, is trying to unlearn some things that doesn't necessarily apply to what you're doing or doesn't fit in the arena anymore. And it's kind of like we're talking about with training scars, you know, old material still trying to creep in. That gets a lot of us. It gets me. And I think that trying to get that out and, you know, move forward with new material or anything that has to do with furthering my training and moving forward in some type of positive way without letting that creep in is hard.
What would you classify as old material then, in terms of, is it just old techniques that haven't moved with the times, or attacks that have evolved?
Yeah, sometimes old techniques, footwork is probably the biggest thing that gets me at times. And I'll see that creep back in. It's like, it's old stuff, man. Why am I doing that? So that's huge. I'm be in the middle of a technique, and I'm like, where did that come from? That's something old that's creeping in from the back, you know. I'm like, I know better than that, you know. So just trying to keep that from creeping back into my stuff that I'm doing now. Sometimes tough because you know, you practice it for so long, so many years, you know, it's really easy to recall upon. Sometimes you have to train it out. That's the easiest way I can put it, is you have to train out the old stuff.
I think if it's muscle memory, it's a bit hard to train out, because you've created all these new connections in your brain. Like we say muscle memory, but you create new parts in your brain that teach you what that feels like and how to do it. So it does make it a bit difficult when you've drilled and drilled and drilled it. I suppose that's where the old adage is, practice makes permanent, and practice makes perfect. But it's all relevant to the system you're applying it to, I suppose, is the key.
Summer